All right, I'll go ahead and get started. The way we usually do these is that I'll speak for just a few minutes, not for very long. Then we'll do a meditation, and then we'll do questions and answers. So I hope that you've brought questions. I'm more interested in talking about things that are on your mind than talking about things that are on my mind. And so, although, as I said, I'll say a few things before we get started, I really like to be responsive to the questions that you bring, either online or here in the room. The meditation we'll do is traditional Zen meditation. And Zen differs from some of the other forms of Buddhist practice in just having a very, very simple style of meditation. So there are other practices, other styles of meditation that involve trying to do more complicated things with our minds or even our bodies. And Zen tries to strip, I think, meditation down as much as possible to the simplest essence. The Japanese term for the style of meditation that we practice is Shikantaza, which translates roughly into just sitting, or nothing but sitting. And the idea is that it's a style of sitting meditation where we sit and we just pay attention to that practice of sitting without adding anything else to the experience. So, as an example, we pay attention to our breathing while we sit, but we don't try to control our breathing in any way. We try to sit upright, but if we notice ourselves slouching, we just make a small adjustment and try to return our posture to the upright form. We don't try to do anything in particular with our thoughts other than to notice whatever thoughts arise. People sometimes think about meditation as clearing our minds. And it's true that sometimes our minds do clear during meditation, but we make no effort to clear them. We simply notice whatever happens to our thoughts, whatever happens to our minds. There may be periods where our minds are quiet, periods where our minds are very loud. And we try to notice both without any particular judgment. And that practicing of noticing without judgment is difficult at first because we generally do come to our meditation with some preconceived notion of what is supposed to happen, what it's supposed to feel like. But I would encourage you as much as possible to try to let go of those ideas and really just to experience each moment exactly as it is. And in doing that, literally practice experiencing each moment of our life exactly as it is. Life's moments, of course, are varied. There are some that are disappointing, some that are painful, some that are pleasant, exciting. And so it's certainly not that each of these moments is the same. But we try not to think of one as better than the other, as one as a goal and another as a non-goal. But instead, just to experience each moment as it comes. That's very difficult, but it's a little bit easier in the context of meditation. We find a quiet space like we have here. We try to limit our distractions. It's a little easier to give up on a goal because we have nothing else we need to do during this next hour or so that we're together. And we just notice whatever arises in our bodies, and in our minds. In more practical terms, you're welcome to sit on a chair or to use one of these cushions. We do try to get as upright as possible so that we're not kind of slouching back. It's traditional to either cross our legs or to have our feet flat on the floor. And we usually place our hands, one palm on the other, and our thumbs lightly touching to make a circle. And that circle has become something of a symbol of Zen practice. We time our meditation with bells. In a traditional Zen temple, only the timekeeper would have a watch or a clock. And so bells are used to signal really everything that happens at a temple. When it's time to wake, when it's time to eat, when it's time to sleep, and when it's time to sit. I always ring the bell 3 times for us to start. And we'll do one sitting together where I'll give some guidance while we sit to help you settle into the practice. I'll ring the bell 2 times at the end of the first sitting, and we'll take a short break where you can stretch your legs, take a drink of water, take on or off a layer of clothing if you're uncomfortable. Then I'll ring the bell 3 times to start again. And that second period will be entirely silent. You can follow the same instructions that I give you in the first. And then I'll ring the bell 1 time at the very end. And I really want to emphasize that in between all those bells, when we're sitting, there really is nothing that you're supposed to do other than pay attention. If you're still sitting when the bell rings to end our period, then you've really done everything right. You've done everything you need to do. We try to let go of any feeling of progress or lack of progress. We're not trying to get our minds into any particular state. We're just trying to pay attention to whatever happens. You may find memories arise, thoughts, feelings, emotions, and there's nothing wrong with any of it. We notice those thoughts, those feelings, those emotions, those memories, without dwelling on them. We notice them and let them go. And then come back to the next moment. The beautiful thing in meditation is that each moment really is a fresh chance to pay attention. So even if we're distracted, even if our minds drift off to something we forgot to do, or something we're looking forward to later, in each moment we can catch ourselves and return our attention back here and start again. And so even though I talk about periods of meditation that might last 10 minutes, 15 minutes, really we're just meditating for one moment, and then we're meditating for another moment, and then another, and another, and another. Each one of those moments is its own period of meditation. And we just try to experience each one as fully as we possibly can. So with that, I'm going to suggest that we find our upright posture, either on the floor on a chair, wherever our online guests find themselves. As I mentioned, I'll ring the bell 3 times for us to start. And when you hear the bell, just listen to the sound of the bell. Listen to it until you can't hear it any longer. And then bring your attention to your breathing. And I'll pick up the instructions from there. Let's begin. Now bring your full attention to your breathing. Not trying to control your breath in any way. Not trying to match your breathing to my breathing or to your neighbors or to any fixed idea of how your breathing should be. Just noticing each breath exactly as it is. Giving your full attention to each in-breath and each out-breath. In-breath, out-breath. In-breath, out-breath. If thoughts arise, let them arise and let them go. Notice the thoughts without grasping them. Notice them and release them. Don't beat yourself up for getting distracted. Just allow each thought to be a reminder to bring your attention back to the next in-breath and the next out-breath. In-breath. Out-breath. In-breath. Out-breath. It often helps in keeping ourselves focused in this moment if we narrate each breath. So with each in-breath, we can say to ourselves, I am breathing in, and with each out-breath, say to ourselves, I am breathing out. I am breathing in, I am breathing out. I am breathing in. I am breathing out. I am breathing in. I am breathing out. Breathing in, breathing out. Try to notice the unique qualities of each and every breath. Notice whether each breath is long or short. Notice whether each breath is fast or slow. Notice these qualities without evaluating them, without judging them, without judging yourself. Don't think to yourself, long is better than short. Don't think to yourself, fast is worse than slow. Just notice each breath exactly as it is. Giving your full attention to each in-breath and each out-breath. In-breath, out-breath. In-breath, out-breath. Whatever arises, thoughts, feelings, memories, emotions. Let them arise. And let them go. Keep coming back to the next in-breath and the next out-breath. Bringing your full attention to each moment and each breath. When you hear me ring the bell 2 times to end this first session, again, listen to the bell. Listen to it until you can't hear it any longer. Then take one more in-breath, one more out-breath, and open your eyes. One more in-breath. One more out-breath. And open your eyes. You can take a minute or two now to stretch, have a drink of water, anything you need to do, and then we'll sit again, really probably in just 2 minutes. Okay, let's find our upright posture again. Back straight and shoulders back. Once again, I'll ring the bell 3 times for us to start. But this time our meditation will be largely silent. When you hear the bell, please listen to the sound of the bell. Listen until you can't hear it any longer. And then bring your attention to your breathing and follow the same instructions I gave you before. Let's begin. remember, whatever brought you here this evening, whatever else you have going on this week, this month, or the rest of this year. Nothing is more important right now, in this moment, than giving your full attention to this moment of sitting and breathing. Because if you can give your full attention to this moment, you can give your full attention to the next moment. And the moment after that, and the moment after that, and to every moment after that. And giving your full attention to every moment is what it means to be fully awake and fully alive. One more in-breath, one more out-breath, and open your eyes. Well, thank you so much for that lovely upright sitting. Really enjoyed it very much. I realized I was so excited for us to get started that I didn't really give any introduction. So it's a little late, but I'm Dan. And I lead this small group talking about and practicing Zen once a month here, the first Tuesday of each month. My own practice began quite a long time ago. I was just telling someone else, I sat my first meditation retreat down in Los Angeles at the Zen Center of Los Angeles when I was still in college. And then lived for about a year at the San Francisco Zen Center, not too far from here, back in the 90s. Was ultimately ordained by Kobanchino Otogawa Roshi, one of the first generation of Japanese Zen Buddhist teachers to come to the States. And he came here to help the San Francisco Zen Center start Tassajara, the first Zen monastery in the West. And I've been practicing for a long time and teaching for not quite such a long time. As I said at the beginning, I really like to focus on answering your questions. And so I hope you've brought some questions with you. And those of you who are online, I would love to see your faces. If you'd like to turn on your camera, you certainly don't have to. But if you have questions, you can raise your hand online, or I think you can put them in the chat if you need to, and we have someone who's, I think, paying attention to that. Hi. So with that, I'm happy to open it up for any questions people have about either what I've talked about or the meditation we've just done, or anything else that may have brought you here. Yes?
Is this important to use the microphone in the room so people on Zoom can hear what we're saying? Thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you.
A question, a silly question. You use the expression, you breathe in to save yourself, you breathe out to save yourself. And my question is, what's being saved? What is saving? Because of the Western connotations to that word. So could you elaborate?
Yeah. We don't know for sure what language Buddha spoke, but the oldest scriptures we have come to us in Pali, this language that's related to Sanskrit. But one funny thing about Pali is the only material we have in Pali are the Buddhist scriptures, which is odd. Because you would imagine if that was Buddha's spoken language, there would be other people would have said other things. Other people would have said things that might have been recorded. But the only things we have in Pali are the Buddhist scriptures. And so that may already be a translation. We don't know if those are his original words or that's a translation of what he said into some language that was just used maybe just for formal practice and study. And then we have other Buddhist scriptures in Sanskrit, Tibetan, Chinese, Japanese. And every time these are translated, we don't know for sure if something is lost, something is added. And then in recent times, I think the first translations into English of Buddhist scriptures were in the 1800s. Maybe there were some in the 1700s, but mostly in the 1800s. And they continue to be translated now. Not even close to all the scriptures have been translated into English. But anyways, when they're translated to English, we need to make some choices. During the pandemic, I like many people, I was stuck at home and not able to do a lot of the things I normally did. And so I decided to use some of that time to study Sanskrit myself. And so studied for a couple years. And the last thing I did, the last class I took, we translated one of the really short scriptures, the Heart Sutra, from Sanskrit into English. And it was interesting because, it basically says what it says in the English translations, but you see right away that people have to make choices about what words to use. So this is a really long-winded way of getting to your question, which is, about this word, saving ourself, and it has... There's a couple of words in that phrase that maybe sound curious, so the saving and the self. So I think usually when we translate into English and use this word saving, it usually has the connotation of liberation. So saving in the sense of freeing. And usually liberation from suffering. Buddha was very concerned with suffering. He began practicing because of his encounters with suffering. That's what brought him to meditation. I think that's what brings most of us to meditation. Some sense of suffering and a desire to overcome it. So saving usually connotes liberating from suffering. And then there's self. And what does the self connote? One of the basic principles of Buddhism in Pali and Sanskrit, it's anatta. It's usually translated to mean no self. The idea that we don't have a permanent, unchanging self. And that distinguishes it from many of the other religions or traditions of India at the time, which did talk about a sort of immortal soul that was inside us. And Buddha felt there wasn't such a thing, that if you looked inside a human, you wouldn't find anything. There wasn't some sort of magic core inside of us. But at the same time, it's not that Buddha taught that we don't exist. So, for example, in the Buddhist scriptures, he uses the first-person pronoun, the equivalent of I and me. And, if he really believed that people didn't exist, that he didn't exist, why would he use that term? What would that be referring to? And so I think the self does exist in the sense that we are actual physical beings. I am here sitting on this chair, taking up space, breathing in and out. But we don't exist as this permanent, unchanging essence or thing. So the me that's sitting here now is not the same me that was sitting here a month ago, or even a moment ago. And the me that's sitting here now is not really separate. If you got a powerful microscope and started drilling in on this supposed boundary here between me and the chair, the sort of closer you got, the less clear it would be where that boundary really was. And so I think saving the self essentially means liberating this interconnected, ever-changing being from the bonds of suffering. And we do that through our practice. That was a heavy question to start with. Usually people start with something lighter, like, should I breathe through my nose? But other questions that either in the room or online. Oh, Martin. Martin's always good for a question. Okay. Go ahead.
Let me unmute myself. Okay, so as long as we're doing heavy questions, then okay. So it seems like in most branches of Buddhism and really in all religions, there's some form of afterlife, right? And the Western traditions sort of simplify that into heaven and hell, but the Eastern traditions, it's a little more sophisticated, and you can have all sorts of different rebirths or reincarnations. And some children seem to remember past lives. And then, there's these researchers at University of Virginia, like Ian Stevenson and Jim Tucker, who did some research on that and seemed to find some evidence that these children were really remembering something that they couldn't possibly have known if they hadn't had some sort of exposure to this prior person's life. And then there's other people who are doing past life regression therapy who seem to be getting some benefit from that. So there seems to be something there in terms of, potential evidence for such a thing. And then all the major religious traditions sort of believe in it. So where do you stand on that, I guess, personally and more generally, in terms of, Zen monks in general, do most Zen monks believe in, some form of a reincarnation or rebirth?
So I think, you're right that different Buddhist traditions put more and less emphasis on this. So on one side, you would have the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, which places a lot of emphasis on reincarnation and for many of the teachers in that tradition, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama, his authority comes from the belief that he's the reincarnation. His Holiness is not just the Dalai Lama, he's the 14th Dalai Lama. And his authority to teach essentially comes from the belief that he's the reincarnation of the 13th Dalai Lama, who is the reincarnation of the 12th, and so on. So it is sort of key to that tradition that such reincarnation exists, since it is the root of so much authority in that tradition. The Zen tradition has a different approach. Zen teachers like myself are not, our authority doesn't come from a belief that we're the reincarnation of some other Zen teacher. It comes from practicing with a Zen teacher who then decides that you practiced at sufficient depth or for sufficiently long that you're qualified to teach others to practice. When you become a teacher, one of the things you do in the Zen tradition is you write out these long documents, and one of those documents, you write your name, and then above your name you write the name of your teacher, who is certifying you. Above that teacher's name you write their teacher, and above that teacher's name you write their teacher, and you go all the way back until you get to Buddha. And so the idea is that authority in the Zen tradition is just what they call a mind-to-mind transmission from one teacher to the next. And so, Buddha gave this person permission to teach, and that person gave another person permission to teach, and that person gave another person permission to teach. And, although this tradition is about 2,500 years old, just because of the length of time it takes to practice and such, it's only 100 and some odd people between me and Buddha, between any modern teacher and Buddha. And so that's our source of authority, is just this much more pragmatic, mind to mind, person to person sort of attestation of qualification. And so maybe in part because of that, I think in Zen we're much less attached to this idea of reincarnation. We tend to focus much more on the concrete, the here and now. Buddha at one point made a list, and I don't remember the other things that are on the list, but a list of the questions that basically couldn't be answered. And his advice for these questions that couldn't be answered was that you just shouldn't worry about them, because you'll just never know whether the answer is right or not. And one of those things was whether there's life after death. Since you'll never know whether there is or not, you can't really use that information to live differently. And so it's just not something that we think a lot about. Buddha did talk a lot about reincarnation, and the Buddhist scriptures talk a lot about reincarnation, and there's whole books about Buddha's previous lives. But I just tend to think that it's not so much that reincarnation is intrinsic to the tradition, it's just that that's what everybody believed at the time. I was having a conversation with someone recently about we have this ability to meditate as human beings, and you can use MRIs and other kind and like EEGs to actually measure that something happens in our brain when we meditate that's unique, that's different from what happens when we do other things. And so it's an interesting question: how or why did our brains evolve to have the ability to meditate? And Buddha doesn't answer that question. But I think the reason he doesn't answer that question is that Buddha didn't know about the theory of evolution. Like it wasn't known at the time. So it wouldn't even occur to him to ask the question, let alone answer it. He understood sort of the science of his day, not the science of our day. And, in his day, all the smartest people believed in reincarnation. Just as today, most of the scientists believe in evolution. And so he just grew up in that context, and so that was the context in which he taught and explained the world. My sense is that if he was around now, maybe he would talk about evolution and why we might have evolved to have brains capable of meditation. But that just wasn't something that was kind of in the sphere of knowledge at the time. So anyways, this is, again, a somewhat long answer to your question, but I don't think a lot about reincarnation. I don't see any particular reason to believe that it exists. And it's not entirely clear how it even meshes with other aspects of Buddhist belief, like this belief in no permanent self. So it's not clear really what would be reincarnated. But I also don't spend a lot of time arguing with like my Tibetan Buddhist friends about it, because I'm not sure that it matters very much. I think the practice of meditation and the importance of paying attention, these basic principles of Zen, would be the same whether reincarnation existed or not. I think some branches of Buddhism seem to sort of teach like extreme patience, because there is this sense that like if it doesn't work out in this lifetime to experience awakening, then maybe it'll just work out in the next lifetime, and so that's okay. And maybe one aspect of Zen that is somewhat unique is I think there is in Zen a little bit of a sense of urgency, that we really should use this lifetime to practice and to experience awakening, because I guess we don't have as much confidence as maybe some of our other Buddhist brothers and sisters that we get another chance. And so you do see in the Zen tradition, just a little bit of a sense of urgency about really using this life as effectively as possible. I hope that's helpful. Yeah.
Sort of on the subject of other religions, it seems like a lot of other practices have sort of ascribed ways to live your life outside of the sort of acts of connection with divine or the acts of praying. Things you shouldn't do, things you should do, things you should restrict yourself from. And I don't know too much about Buddhism yet, but it seems that it's mainly focused on the act of meditation. And I'm wondering if there are other ways that it ascribes you to live to help with meditation, or if you really can live your life however you please outside of meditation, do anything you like, and as long as you do meditation in the correct way, you have an equal chance of getting to that enlightened place.
Yeah, it's a good question. And again, different Buddhist traditions emphasize different things. The word Zen is the Japanese pronunciation of a Chinese word, Chan, which is itself the Chinese pronunciation of a Sanskrit word that really just means meditation. And so Zen Buddhism is literally meditation Buddhism. It is the branch of Buddhism that has decided to focus almost entirely on meditation. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a moral code to Buddhism and a moral component to practice. Buddha talked a lot about things you should and shouldn't do, and particularly for monks and nuns, for people who chose to ordain, there were literally hundreds of rules about how they were supposed to live. Now, these rules weren't divine, like they weren't laws that were given by some supernatural figure. All these rules arose from what Buddha called the law of karma, which really just means the law of cause and effect. So the rules are just almost more, from Buddha's perspective, observations, that if you do certain things, then other things happen. And so if you don't want, for example, bad things to happen, then you shouldn't do things that will lead to bad things. And so there were admonitions against killing and stealing and sexual misconduct and some things that are more unique to Buddhism. He was against using any intoxicants, so drugs or alcohol that intoxicate the mind. I think for sort of the obvious reason that it seemed inconsistent with the kind of mindfulness that we're trying to cultivate in meditation. But again, these rules, he didn't present them as having come from any higher authority. He presented them as just being things that would lead to a life of less suffering, and that breaking these rules would lead to more suffering. And so it isn't literally the case that as long as you meditate, nothing else matters. You could meditate and do all these other things that he advised against, and what he would say is that's unlikely to lead to kind of true liberation, because you'll just be sort of bringing on so much suffering by those kinds of actions. And I'll say two more things about that. One is just as a general rule, Buddha taught that bad consequences tend to come from one of three sort of unwholesome roots. And those three roots were greed, hate, and delusion. So when you do an action that's motivated by one of those, that's motivated by greed, hate, or delusion, that's unlikely to be healthy for you or for the world. It's likely to lead to suffering. So the first two of those are relatively easy to understand. Acting out of greed, so we shouldn't act out of just a desire to get more and more things. Acting out of hate, we shouldn't act out of a desire just to hurt others. Delusion is a little harder to understand, but I think in general it's that we shouldn't act out of sort of a misperception of the world. We should try to see the world as clearly as we can. And I think part of our practice of meditation is to notice things as they are. And so something that meditation helps us with is cutting through that delusion. So that's one just for a very general guideline, is that any action motivated by greed, hate, or delusion is likely to be problematic, and an action that's not motivated by those is more likely to be positive. But I think the second thing I wanted to add was that despite having these fairly strong ideas about what does and doesn't lead to suffering and what is and isn't a wholesome motivation, Buddha was in other ways quite non-judgmental and was willing to teach basically anyone in front of him. So he had students from all walks of life, from royalty to slaves. And there are famous examples of, like, there was a mass murderer who came to Buddha to study, and he taught him and didn't refuse, even though this person had done many difficult things. And that's still how Buddhist teachers are supposed to operate. So I don't question any of you when you come in here about your past or what brings you here, or whether you're engaged in wholesome or unwholesome activities outside of our meditation space. My calling or my obligation is just to teach whoever comes, and hope that my teaching helps lead you on a path toward reducing suffering. I can't tell if someone has put a question in the chat. There's something in the chat. No, that's you. Okay. You're confusing me. Other questions in the room or online? Yeah.
Hi, Armin. I was thinking recently about how when I'm lucky enough to be on a retreat, I find it very easy to focus on just doing one thing at a time. And in my daily life, it's much harder. And so I think that, on a retreat, there's not much to do, so it makes it easier. But I wonder if you have any thoughts on how to cultivate that same sort of feeling outside of just maintaining the regular meditation practice, which does help.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's absolutely true. I mean, I find it as well. Armin, you've heard me say this before, because I say this on retreats often, but most of us, when we think about like becoming a monk or a nun, living a life the way Buddha did, it sounds very difficult. They wake up extremely early in the morning, they live a life of poverty, they're traditionally celibate. It sounds very arduous and difficult. But Buddha didn't think of it that way. Buddha thought of that as the easy path. And he thought what all of us are doing, what all of you are doing, everyone online, of trying to practice while living in the world, that was the difficult path. And I think you're experiencing that although it sounds hard to be on a retreat even, and sometimes you might describe it to a friend and they say, that sounds terrible, that sounds really difficult, I wouldn't want to do that. There's a way in which it's much easier. You don't have to make as many choices, you don't have as many distractions. You have sort of the power of the Sangha, the community, kind of pulling you forward. There's something really quite easy about it, and something really quite difficult about maintaining our practice on our own. So I think, first of all, I just would say it's okay to notice that. That's Buddha noticed that too. So people have been noticing that for a long time, that it's just much harder to practice in the world than it is to practice in a more kind of monastic, separated, secluded environment. And so that's okay. And part of why we do go on retreats maybe, or even just come to a space like this, it is to get that little extra boost, to get some help with our practice, to make it easier on ourselves, and that's okay too. But I think, that doesn't mean that it's not possible to practice elsewhere, at home, in a busy life. And Buddha had lots of students who didn't ordain, who kept their day jobs, their other responsibilities, and some of who were quite adept students. I think it helps to try to mimic some of the aspects of kind of more monastic existence, like to have a bit of a set schedule, a certain time when you sit. I find it very helpful to have a certain place where I practice. And so then it's almost like, at that time and in that place, we kind of enter a little bit of a retreat of our own. And our bodies, our mind starts to associate that area with practice. Sometimes carrying over other rituals, like, I don't have a bell quite as nice as this, but I have a bell at home that I use for meditation. I think that can help. But I think a combination of trying to have some aspect of routine, occasionally coming and sitting with a group to kind of help boost our practice, and just being easy on yourself, and not beating yourself up for the fact that it's difficult. It is difficult. It's not always clear why it's difficult, but there is something about the busyness of our daily lives that just makes practice a little bit harder. So to the extent that you can simplify things as well, that can be helpful. But if you can't, you can't, and that's okay. Just keep at it. It's not supposed to be easy. Probably have time for another question or two if there's... Yeah, please.
One question I had was, I feel like in meditation a lot, I have different experiences, but I don't really know what the experience I should be trying to have is, if that makes sense. Like, for example, in our meditation today, I was, at times very focused on like my breath and how it felt being in this room and kind of being focused on being present. But at other times, like one thing that was coming to mind a lot was I felt like there were all these people that really were annoying me this week, like my boss or this Muni officer. And I think I was like feeling all this like frustration welling up and anger, and then kind of going through the process of thinking through that and thinking, I guess sometimes I think through like broader concepts like forgiveness or compassion or trying to understand people. And at other times I feel like I'm just, you know, not necessarily thinking of anything, but like ideas and thoughts are coming to my mind. And I think all of those are pleasant and things that I enjoy in meditation. And I see value in kind of different things. And sometimes I'm just thinking of, you know, dumb stuff that has very little value. But I guess I maybe particularly within the confines of Zen Buddhism, I guess I feel like I don't know what to latch onto as what I should be aspiring to have, or what experience is maybe seen as the most beneficial in practicing meditation.
Thank you. It's a great question. Yeah, there isn't any particular experience that you're supposed to have. Our practice really is just to notice whatever arises, and honestly, not to latch on to any of it. The stuff that maybe seems more beneficial or feels less beneficial or more relevant or less relevant, we don't latch on to any of it. We try to notice all of it, and which it sounds like you're doing. You're noticing all these things arising in yourself. You're noticing, you know, feelings of frustration or anger at your boss or this officer, noticing ideas that seem interesting and other ideas that seem silly. And, you know, I think that's great. It's great that you can notice all these things. And that is the practice. The practice is just to notice these things without necessarily labeling any of them as beneficial or silly or positive or negative. We're not trying to create any particular state of mind. What we're exercising is essentially attention, this sort of muscle of attention. So it's almost like, you know, you're if you were trying to strengthen your bicep muscle, you know, it doesn't really matter what you lift. Like you could lift metal, you could lift stone, you could lift wood, you could lift rice. Anything that exercises that muscle is going to be beneficial in some way, is going to strengthen that muscle. And in the same way, it doesn't really matter what you're paying attention to, what is arising in your mind, as long as you're paying attention to it, as long as you're exercising that muscle of attention, you're noticing all these different things that are coming up. That's your only job in meditation. So you're not trying to steer your mind toward certain kinds of thoughts or away from other thoughts. There's nothing wrong with noticing, you know, that you're frustrated, or even that you're maybe physically uncomfortable. Maybe the room felt too warm or too cold, or you know, you wore clothes that were too tight or too loose. We just notice these feelings. We notice whatever arises in our minds, and we just keep noticing one moment after the other. The reason we come back to paying attention to our breath is not that there's any magic to paying attention to our breath, but just it serves as a kind of natural anchor into this present moment, because the breath doesn't stop. And so it helps us from getting too caught up, from latching on to these thoughts, and allows us just to notice them. You know, notice I'm feeling frustrated, or I'm feeling happy, or I'm hearing sounds, and then just notice the next breath and notice the next thing that arises. So from the way you described your experience, I'd say you're doing just fine.
I have a question that I'd like to ask if
Yeah, you could ask me a question afterwards. That's fine. Let's get you the microphone so our friends online can hear you.
Just sort of going off what you just said, is there, I know there's no magic to the breath, but, can you focus on things that are not the breath, say just the sound, just your body, or is there slight magic to the breath in that should be a component of it at all times?
It's usually where I recommend students start, but no, you can do pure listening meditations or pure meditations on feeling the sensations of your body. The breath does seem to be very powerful and grounding, just because, as I said, it doesn't stop; it's always with us. Unlike our heart rates, which usually we can't notice our heartbeats without making some extra effort. The breath we have access to all the time. So it is where I recommend people start. It's the basis of most of my meditation, but no, you're welcome to experience with anything that keeps you grounded in this present moment. I think that's probably all we have time for in our last minute.
Thank you all so much.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks so much
again.
for coming, and I'll be back here the first Tuesday of next month.
And every month.
Take care.